Welcome and hello to Living the Dream, which is a creative conversation and Q&A with Brianna Randall, Nicole Dunn, and Dove Sussman. I'm your host, Jeremy N. Smith. I'm a writer, I'm a consultant, I'm a coach, and I help people and teams reconnect with their power and purpose and bring big dreams to life. I've got this online event series that you're joining today where we invite cool creative people to share their tips, tricks, and personal stories, and then answer questions from you, the audience. So thank you for being here with open ears and then open minds to ask the questions that are burning for you. Today is really special because we're going to discuss making a dream move, both the how of making it happen and what it really feels like before, during, and after. Welcome. And let's get into it. Brianna Randall is a writer whose nonfiction focuses on the intersection of nature, adventure, and science, and whose fiction ranges from kids' books to romance. And in 2013, she and her husband, Rob, quit their jobs, sold most of their belongings, and set sail across the Pacific as crew on other people's boats. 1 year, 6,000 miles, and 7 sailboats later, they made a baby in the kingdom of Tonga. By 2018, they had 2 kids and 1/3 ownership of a sailing catamaran, and they spent the next 4 winters sailing in the Bahamas as a family. She kept sailing. She's got some updates. We'll get to those a little later in the call. Nicole Dunn is a writer, poet, spoken word artist, musician, and community organizer. She's an ordained member of the Order of Interbeing in the Plum Village tradition of Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and she's the founder and program director of Be Here Now, which is a weekly meditation group that's been meeting in Missoula, Montana since 2002. She's also the co-founder and program director of Empty Mountain, which is a small, sprouting, off-grid mindfulness practice center situated in the woods 60 miles west of Missoula. And that's where she and her husband, Mike, live, having moved there on July 1st, 2022. So 2 years and 3 weeks exactly. Dove Sussman, you mind waving, Dove? Yes. Spent the 90s and early 2000s in a variety of big cities and college towns as a tech employee and faculty spouse. He got divorced. He co-wrote a movie screenplay, which became a major motion picture, Last Night, starring Morgan Freeman and Clive Owen. And 15 years ago, en route to a new life in Los Angeles, he stopped in the southern Mexican beach town of Puerto Escondido, and he never left. He lives there with his sons, Darius and Dexter, and has written many more scripts and screenplays. And he's opened and run a hostel, a restaurant, a movie theater, a cafe, and a school, besides putting his toes in the sand, I'm sure. So thank you, Bree. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Dove. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I see we've got a good crew, and I know some of you have come in since we started. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so in conversation with these 3 about their big moves, and then we're just going to open up to you and your questions. So stay curious and stay connected and hear a little bit more of their stories, and then get to yours. So obviously, with 3 of you, I'll ask to keep answers brief-ish, but personal and deep as you can within that constraint. And maybe we'll mix it up, but I'll start maybe going in a Nicole Dove order for this first question. When did you first get the idea for your move?
My husband, Mike, and I have been together a little over 25 years. So we got married young. We were 21 years old. And really early on in our relationship, we talked about wanting to, in the future, it was definitely a future move for us, but wanting to live surrounded by nature, just live. We were especially called to the woods. So living with nature space around us. And I think a few years into our relationship, tacked onto the vision was added the element of also wanting to start a mindfulness practice center where we could host events and retreats and potentially, hopefully one day move into having people live out there seasonally or full time. So pretty early on, this was a trajectory that we had in mind for us. Again, in the future, it wasn't something we were ready for at the time, but it was a seed that was planted pretty early on for us. And finally made the leap, sold our house in Missoula, which we were in for 20 years, and my stepson graduated high school, and we were ready to do it. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Dove, is that question even valid? Did you have the idea for the move, or did you move by accident?
No, yeah. Well, yeah, I totally had no plans to move here. I had no plans to have this life at all. In fact, it's funny because actually I had two paths I was like going to go on. One was going to be moved to LA, do that life. And the other one, I was seriously looking into buying a sailboat.
Mm.
I'd sailed my whole youth, my whole life, and I'd like had my eye on it, seriously dropping for them. And I'm actually glad I didn't do that.
I hear you.
That would have been a completely different life. And what I actually decided on is I don't want to decide right now. I'm just going to go traveling for a bit. And I ended up here, and I ended up seeing that there's this completely different way of living, this completely different life that really just popped in my face and really appealed to me. And it started off by just extending and extending and extending. It wasn't a plan. It was never a plan to make a life here until it was. And then there's a girl involved in the story as well. It's usually the case. It was an accident, exactly like you said, Jeremy. It was an accident.
Cool. And as you may have this, those of you with very fine ears can know that Dove got to Mexico, not from the United States, or was coming from the United States, but he's part of the larger NAFTA community. He actually started in Canada, even further north. Mm-hmm. So I guess I wanted to just get into like practical steps for a second. Once you were like, if I was going to make this real, what's step 1 or 2 or 3 to actually leap from the island you're on to this new location? Do you mind if we start with you, Bree?
Sure. I think for me, at least, it was to set a date because then I have a deadline. And I'm a writer, so I work well in deadlines. But set a date. That's really important. And then you can make lists after that. And I'm not a detailed list person, but it really helps to make the lists and start to check stuff off. And you feel like you've accomplished things like, okay, I will give my notice at my job here, or I will sell my car here, or we will start researching and narrowing down where we're sailing here. So that helps me.
I will. Yeah, dates, and then I will. Yeah. Great. Yeah. Love it. And it sounds like those were some of the key items. It was notice, sell.
Yeah. And the logistics get deep, right? I guess the other two might know that, like, oh, you have health insurance and mail and renters maybe. And those logistics get easier. I'm a little different than the other two because I keep leaving. So I like to live in Missoula, but I like to keep going on adventures. So I make it harder for myself because I'm constantly doing logistics. But they get a lot easier and they become a part of your life. And Jeremy, I'd like to say that the first thing in this is to say yes. Mm-hmm. You have to say yes and then set a date. So Rob said yes to me, and then I said yes back to him, and then we went.
Okay, yes, date, then get her done. Okay, love it. Yeah, Nicole, what is that question of those first 1, 2, 3 steps out of the thinking and into the action look like?
Well, for me, it was really important because I am such a planner and an organizer, and I'm really logistically minded. Mike and I started setting up like a weekly business meeting to like sit down and talk about this thing we wanted to do and figure out how to boots on the ground, make this happen. And I feel like for me, setting that time every week, and no, we didn't do it every week, but most weeks, and as we, things picked up, we were really intentional about keeping that meeting time because it was without that set time, like, hey, we're going to meet for an hour on Sunday. Like without that, I think it would have been just so easy for life to just fill up with life, like household upkeep and jobs and resting and cooking dinner without making an intentional plan. Like I'm just such a big planner. It's just, if we don't make a plan, it's not going to happen. So that business meeting time was super important for us, and doing it most weeks for quite a while up to the lead up for us to make the leap. That was so important for us. For me in particular, I think Mike was just a really good sport, not a planner, and I am. So, but I think he started coming around to see like, okay, if we don't actually sit down and talk through this thing, it's not going to happen. So.
Okay. I just want to say that out loud, the standing date. And it's like a date with your dream, even though it's logistic. It's like, oh yeah, we've got to build the relationship for it to be real. Yeah. And I'm guessing we're going to get a counterpoint in the sense that, Dove, you were doing this, I don't know, but what do I know? It didn't sound as much like a plan, but at the same time,
at some point it became one.
At some point it became one. So yeah, what was,
well, in my case,
brief, like, yeah.
Well, in my case,
what made it real?
It's a little different because I'm dealing with another country. Yeah. And things work differently here. But as you also know, I think you well know, so I'm very an aficionado of these like logistics, like alternate logistics, learning how things work. It's part of the adventure. Mm-hmm. But first and foremost has to be for the audience, if you're thinking about going to a different country, you got to learn the language. You really got to deal with that first. You got to spend the time to deal with learning the language, learning how things work, learning what's different. Before you can like really make a big plan, and taking the time to acclimatize. Dealing with whatever back home. I mean, if you packed up, if everything's in storage, if things can be put on hold for a long time. Figuring out how to actually make the final leap. There's always that final leap. Where do I actually live? Do I actually live here yet? Am I still between two places? But like that can be put off for quite a while. But I'd recommend like figuring out how the new place really works and taking that time and making that part of the adventure.
And I want to clarify, you didn't do the figuring out how it worked or learning the language before you went there. You figured it out by going there, and that's where you learned the language. So it's, you leapt and then you looked.
Yeah, I did the entire thing on the ground after I was already, yeah, exactly.
So you can do it by accident or with no plan or knowledge.
Zero planning. Zero.
But there is the interim state. You can leap, but you do need to then commit to learning after the leap before. Yeah. Is that about right?
Yeah. I mean, you can literally do it with zero planning. do it all after you get there.
So language and then how things work and having patience and interest in that process. Is that what you're saying? And
I think
what would you put in that category? Yeah.
It frustrates a lot of people. I see it all the time. People floundering around, people complaining that things don't work like they do back home. People not being able to actually figure out how they actually work, like at all. Just can't do it. So yeah, having a little bit of setting the bar, assuming that you're not going to necessarily succeed at getting your stuff done. And not letting it frustrate you.
We had someone in the chat called it falling forward instead of backwards. And I want to add to that forward. It can be really helpful. What's coming up for me is to have someone who's a few steps forward of you, who is there. So for me, I did also spend a fair amount of time. I spent a year living in Mexico where Dove is, and he was ahead of me. So it was really nice to have that person that did actually have all the answers and had figured that stuff out. So thanks for being the pioneer. So getting real for a minute, if I ask what was or has been the hardest part of the process, what are the low points? What comes up? And maybe we'll reverse the order this time. What comes up for you as the hardest part for you now, 15-year journey? Dove, I'll start with you and then go Nicole and then go Bree.
It's an interesting question. I mean, reflecting on it, it doesn't seem like there were that many much downside to it. I guess from a career standpoint, it's harder to make those. If you're still thinking about maintaining some career from back home, connections to back home, those things are harder, obviously. you could say like, oh, I could just jump on a plane and go to a meeting if I need to, but it doesn't really work that way. You're going to have to give up some of that. But if you're living the dream, you're building a new life. You're making a new life in a new place. You just have to resign yourself to the fact that you can't have it all. You can't have everything you had back there and a whole new, shiny, new, brand new life here. But that's fine. I mean, I don't think too much about the down parts of it. I don't have too many regrets.
Nicole, break our hearts, make us cry. Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. No. Yeah. What do you got?
Well, first, I just want to say I appreciate that of us, the three of us here on this call with you, Jeremy. We so love that we have different experiences to share from because there's so many different ways to do the thing, whatever your thing is. So I just love that we have different perspectives and takes on that because there's just so many different ways to do it. So for me, one of the hardest aspects of this, like taking the leap and selling the house, as a little bit of background, we sold our house without having anything in place. So we hadn't found land that we could afford to buy yet. So we took a leap, sold the house, and said, well, hopefully we'll find some land that we can afford to buy. And hopefully it will be soon. So that was really scary. But really the hardest part for me was like traversing the space between idea and action. Those two things felt like two totally different planets for me. And I had a really hard time. I'm a slow transitioner, and I just had a really hard time traversing space. And I feel like my husband, I think, is very similar to Dove. And I think he was just waiting on planet action. And he was like, come over here. And I'm like, I'm on planet idea. I don't know how to get to there. There's all this space, and I'm not an astronaut. It took me just a really long time to figure out how to take a leap into the unknown when we had nothing in place. We had a van to live out of, thankfully. We bought an old 1989 Chevy van. And fortunately, our life motto at the time was, well, something will happen. And we had the luxury of some family member will take us in if worse comes to worse, or probably someone will take us in if it comes down to that. We knew we wouldn't be able to afford to buy anything again in Missoula, but something will happen. So anyway, traversing that space. For me personally, that was really hard. My husband was ready to go way before I was, and he had to wait for me to cross space to get to planet action.
What's really powerful, just I think, when you were like, I sold the house, and then it's like before you I think what's the phrase, like you burned the ships so you couldn't sail back. Yeah. Okay, I love those planets too. Okay, Bree.
Yeah,
what's coming up for you?
Parts.
And you've written about some of this stuff too, but
I think
for those of us who aren't familiar with it.
Like Nicole said, because we all have such different experiences, and mine is trying to have it all, as Dove said, trying to have both our community in Missoula, and my parents live there, and my sisters, our family and our friends, which is something that I miss a lot when I travel abroad and when I live on a sailboat. Leaving community is really hard. But similarly, aside from the logistics, the hardest part for me is the transitions between A and B. And this is why most people just choose A or B. It's really tricky to go from living on a sailboat with the kids and not wearing shoes for 2 months and not really seeing anyone, having like an insular family and barely even going near towns, much less other people, to back to Missoula and back to soccer and piano and 9-to-5 jobs. So I guess my advice is maybe don't do that, even though I'm still committed to doing it. And the alternative, when people say, why do you do that? It seems really hard to pull your kids out of school for 2 or 3 months every winter. Like, why do you keep doing that? And I say, because for me, it's harder not to do it. It's harder for my spirit to not sail, to not travel, to not go experience the world and teach these kids that too. And so I remind myself of that during the low points. This is better than not doing it at all. For me.
Honoring the spirit. Yeah. We'll keep this our new order. So I'll go to you, Dove, first. What surprised you the most?
Wow. It surprised me the most was my ability to redo myself. How easy it was to let old life fall off and new life come in. It wasn't hard at all. It was a revelation in the sense of, I think so many people are so stuck in their first world rut of this is the only way to live and not being able to see a different way. And I was surprised at how quickly it just happened. Like, I want to do this. I want to do this. Not that this is necessarily better than the other, but it's just a completely different way of living. And I was surprised at how quickly it was just now I'm doing this life. And I think, it happened very fast. After was 35, 36 when I got here, and after that many years of living one way, and now living a completely different way.
Yeah. Nicole, what's been the biggest surprise for you?
Yeah, so for me, so just as a little preface, my husband and I, so we bought 24 acres of land, and we live pretty remotely, although we're also very accessible, which was a trick to find. But we live off-grid, and we also live without running water. And neither of us have ever lived this way before. And something that's really surprising for me is how much I'm really enjoying it. Like on some level, it's a little bit more work, and on some level, it's not, or it's just work I would rather be doing. And just having like the intimate connection with like my living systems of water and electricity, and we use wood for heat, and I'm just really enjoying that. And I didn't really think it through or know how much I would appreciate that. And when we were looking for land, we weren't super passionate about, we're going to live off grid without running water. Like, that's our dream. We were open to it, and we were willing to do that and learn it. But if we had found land that we could afford to buy that had a well on it and electricity, like the grid to plug into, we would have been like, yeah, that's fine. That's great. That would have been preferred. But for what we could afford, we bought bare land. There's no structures, no services, no cell signal. And that was a very different way of living. We've lived in town with electricity and the faucets our whole lives. We're 45 years old now. And so anyway, yeah, I'm really enjoying that. And to me, it's a little surprising. I guess that's surprising for me.
Cool. So yeah, I'm getting from Dove, you don't have to be who you are. And I'm getting from Nicole, you don't have to get what you want. What's been surprising what was the biggest surprise for you, Bri?
I think that just what Nicole was saying, like when you devote your days, especially at the beginning of these moves, to survival and to finding your water and setting up your food and learning a language and like navigating streets, really basic stuff, how much that opens you up as a person and how much more you notice about the people in the world around you, how much time slows down, which is a real gift in our culture, and how much more you get to just be present with your people that are with you in that space. And I think even more than the beauty of the sailing or the fun excitement of traveling, that's what I love, is that slowdown and the forced noticing of your day-to-day life, whether you're hauling water from a well or, in our case, on a sailboat, measuring each drop and then having to fill up or make water. Or for us, like, there's no fresh food in the Bahamas for 2 months. So you really, really value a banana as opposed to home where I'm like, well, I better get 8 more bananas today just in case. I appreciate that. And it was surprising to me how much I did enjoy just something I never would have prioritized. I didn't know I wanted that until I was in it.
I've got more questions, but I'm sure others in the audience are really itching. So I want to open it up to them. Can you please share those in the chat if you've got a question, and I'll do a little picking and choosing from them and do my best to relay them to our group here. Okay. So amazing question from Kelly. How did you deal with the fear of the unknown? And maybe we'll mix up the order. Why don't I start with you, Nicole?
Okay. So Nicole is a percolator, so answering stuff on the spot is not my strong suit. So let's see. So I was hoping you weren't going to call me first, but it's fine. For me, what comes up for that question, I guess, is I have a strong practice that very much ties into our mindfulness tradition of self-befriending. It's just something I invest a lot of intentional time and energy in. And so when whatever feeling comes up for me that I don't like or I find unpleasant or I'm just like, no to whatever that is, for me, that's a sign that says, okay, here's a self-befriending moment. This is a next level practice. And okay, I see you, fear, we're in it together, and it's okay that you're on board, and we'll just ride this out together. And like to just really give myself a lot of grace and space. And it's hard. It's not an easy practice. It's a hard practice when there's really difficult emotions on board like that. But I really practice to, I almost use the word embrace, and I think that's further down the line, but at least acknowledge that it's there and not try to fight it with everything I have. Just be like, okay, here it is, and we're going to live together, and it'll be okay for a little bit, and be on my own side. Yeah.
Compassionate self-talk, grace, and space, and practice until it's a practice. What's coming up for you about fear of the unknown stuff?
That's a great answer, Nicole, by the way. But I guess for me, I would say you're asking the wrong guy. That's the whole point. I mean, I'm not saying everyone should have this mindset, but for me, there's no fear of the unknown. That's the entire purpose of the exercise, I guess. It's new, it's exciting, it's an adventure, it's discovery, it's learning, there's nothing to fear.
So, to boldly go.
Yeah, thank you for that, by the way.
Bree, what comes up for you? You've heard two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. I think I'm probably in the middle of the spectrum. And I was scared. We went to South America this last year with the kids for 3 months, and I was really nervous about taking them to Bolivia, which is I was nervous because it was landlocked, and I like the ocean. And two, because it's a developing country, and I wasn't sure how it would go. And I read something while I was staying up at night that said anxiety is equal to our fear divided by or multiplied by our thought that we can't cope with whatever we're afraid of. And so then it always calms me down because I think I can cope with it. What's the worst thing? Like I'll just figure it out and it'll come to me. And so I guess I deal with fear by thinking of the past things I've accomplished. And that can be, it doesn't have to be related to traveling or making big moves. It can be related to grief. It's a windstorm that blew your power out and you had to live without power all night. It could be so many different things. And it turns out that we're really capable when we need to be. And so that's how I face my fear.
That's so beautiful too. Could you say that equation again?
Yeah, except I have the actual metric down. It's something like anxiety equals fear multiplied by your perception that you cannot cope. That was what I read. And then the inverse of that is the more you believe you can cope and understand that you'll be able to handle what comes your way, the more you can conquer the fear. So the anxiety is cannot deal with whatever you're afraid of, but actually we're fully capable of it.
I'm just loving this. It's really inspiring for me to think about those. I've got another question from Alex, and I'm guessing we're going to have a range of answers. How do you make decisions? By strategy and rational planning or by gut intuition? Dov, you want to start us with this one?
Yeah, I think, you could dream with your heart, but you have to make decisions with your head. Especially in these cases, you really have to take the rational path. I think is the way to go when you're actually making a decision for me.
Okay. So your gut takes you there, but then your gut gives you your options, and then your rational part is it just tells us what to do. Is that what you're saying?
Is this real? Can I really do this? What should I actually be doing? Is this a good idea? Is there danger involved? Is there risk involved? You have to consider those things. I can imagine this particularly from crossing an ocean, for example. That would require a tremendous amount of rational planning and decision making, especially traveling with kids. It's interesting. When I got here, I didn't have kids. I had my kids here. So that certainly changes things as well, whether if you're going to be doing this with children or not. I'm about to probably embark on another fairly big move in the near future. Not that big, but I'm doing it with children. And more than ever, I mean, you have to make those decisions rationally.
Bree?
Yeah, I think if it doesn't start with your gut, then it's not worth doing it. So you have to start there. You have to start with my body, my whole self wants to do this, or else it's really not worth the loads of rational and strategy planning that does go into these moves, because you need both. So that's my advice, is do a deep check. And then, yeah, for what I do, there's no way, kids especially, you can't do it without a lot of strategy and planning. It's pretty important. That being said, some of that I often say is just to alleviate the fear. So there's people that say that, like, I'm looking at sailboats out in front of me, and some of these boats never leave the dock because they're planning. They don't have the best rope. They don't have the best anchor. They're never going to leave. So you can make your rational planning hamstring you and handcuff you to your place. So really it's more just like the safety factors. I think that was great, Dev.
Cool. Great. It's not a metaphor. It's literally in front of you. Yeah. The dock. They're in the water, but they're tethered to the land.